Colleagues and guests, I'm delighted to welcome you to the 2021 conference of the Police Superintendents Association and to stand here in person, talking to a room full of people, a privilege and a pleasure we will certainly never take for granted again. It is disappointing that the Home Secretary is unavailable to attend our conference in person. I have been grateful for a positive engagement with our association during my tenure as President. There are many areas in which we pose challenge to the government, but I have appreciated her efforts and continued efforts to speak directly with me, national officers and our members. We also recognise the positive changes she's made in support of working hours for part-time members and the recognition on our on-call responsibilities. However, much of what I'm about to say will not be easy listening for the government, chief officers, or indeed my colleagues in the room. It is right that the government faces challenge, which will be part of my address today, as I believe that the government is failing officers and staff. 2 years ago, I stood upon this very stage to deliver my inaugural speech as President of the Association. The nature of policing is such that my predecessors would have dealt with unique challenges during their leadership, facing national reform, major operational incidents, many of which have changed our service delivery forever. Did I expect the same? Of course. Did I expect it to be easy? Never. Did I expect to lead during a global pandemic? No. Do I believe our police service has risen to the challenges? Without question. Looking back over my conference speeches over the last 2 years, despite the fact that the surrounding context of each was markedly different, many of the issues remain unchanged. In fact, if I was to look over the speeches of my predecessors over the past 10 years, sadly, I would no doubt see them relentlessly running through a similar narrative. Each year at conference, within this address, we celebrate the achievements of our service and the pride we feel in policing. We also look at the context within which we are being asked to deliver and the framework our government provides to enable police officers to protect communities and keep people safe. Every year, we hear from government that our efforts are appreciated and valued, and that those in power recognise the incredible police service our country is privileged to be served by. We also hear promises and commitments to change that will make this recognition clear. It's worth reflecting on the government commitments made to us in the last 2 years and the progress that has been made. In 2019, I welcomed and applauded the government's commitment to returning our workforce numbers to those of 2010, with the promise of 20,000 new officers. No one would question the necessity for this generational recruitment drive. I also explained the incredible demand facing our members, policing's most senior operational leaders, who are tasked with leading this huge workforce growth, alongside the management of the most serious threat, harm and risk facing the public. I explained that our rank had taken the biggest reduction during austerity of any in the service, whilst demand upon us soared, and called for an appropriate and proportionate increase in our numbers to support the workforce growth. In 2020, I explained that the result of this was that working hours of a representative sample of our members showed that before the pandemic, we were working the hours across the country of almost 160 additional full-time superintendents. The government agreed to provide, I quote, "the frontline leaders you need to make this work, and to hold chief constables to account for resourcing their forces in the most appropriate way." Colleagues, I share with you today that according to official Home Office data, the number of superintendents across the UK has increased by only 25 in the last year. From inspector rank through to chief constable, once again, superintendents have seen the lowest rate of increase, and incredibly, our rate of increase is even less than that of chief officers. Remembering our rank received the highest cut under austerity measures. I will not be the only person baffled by these numbers. We have repeatedly presented the evidence that clearly outlines the case for even a modest increase in colleagues to ensure that service delivery is not compromised by piling more responsibility on superintendents as part of the Uplift programme in response to COVID and alongside day-to-day demand. Have no doubt that sitting at the top of every process relating to Uplift is a superintendent, giving full responsibility for getting the assigned numbers through the door. From clothing officers with uniform, boots and kit to training them, dealing with HR, promoting their good work, a superintendent will be held to account. Most of all, we want to ensure that these new recruits deliver the best possible service to the public. From an organisational perspective, these recruits need to enter an infrastructure that is prepared for them. And while this all happens, day-to-day work continues at a relentless pace. Time and time again, we are told that decisions around this sit with chief officers. But if the national direction clearly outlines a requirement for additional leadership at this level, who is being held to account to ensure this happens? Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, Sir Tom Windsor, told this very conference today that the case for a proportionate increase in superintendents is unanswerable. Should my colleagues just accept the fact that they're required to work hours that regularly contravene working time regulations, whilst also managing hundreds of staff that depend on their expertise and experience and responding to critical incidents with huge discretionary effort to safeguard the public? No one in the room will have missed the hugely disappointing announcement received in July confirming there will be no pay increase for police officers this year. We have publicly recognised the economic impact of the pandemic on all our country, and we have realistic expectations as to what this means. But the story behind this decision is surely difficult to defend. We have repeatedly heard from government that they want a better deal for the police and a worse deal for criminals. How is a better deal a pay freeze for the people sent out on Frontline during a deadly pandemic? A pay freeze based on a decision that disregarded the independent processes put in place to safeguard the rights of public servants. The government decided that there would be a pay freeze long before it took account of any evidence submitted to the Police Remuneration Review Body, or as we know it, PRRB. In fact, the PRRB was not given permission to make recommendations on this year's pay uplift. Alongside this, we hear that colleagues in the NHS, local authorities and fire service are to receive an uplift, something we applaud. Yet that leaves the police as clear outliers for reasons we cannot fathom. No one enters policing to get rich. It's a vocation and a career that provides challenge and demands sacrifice like no other, something clearly demonstrated amidst the pandemic. However, with very few employment rights, it's essential that police officers have fair and transparent processes in place to determine their pay, and that they have a clear voice within this. The government direction on public service pay has overridden these processes, making decisions around pay in advance of the evidence it requests from stakeholders right across the service. The PRRB itself has echoed these concerns, stating that it's disappointing that the pandemic has been allowed to affect the independence of the review body process, again preventing its ability to fully exercise its role. Currently, we have no procedural justice when it comes to pay, and police officers are not being heard. For this reason, I can announce today that the Police Superintendents Association is withdrawing from the PRRB process. We no longer see the value of our involvement, which has no bearing whatsoever on the decisions made regarding pay. we are in liaison with other staff associations over options to challenge what we see is a clear violation of the agreed independent process. I must also address the issue of police pensions. I am staggered and saddened to report that we are in the midst of legal action against our government. Police pensions are a complex subject which I don't intend to cover in detail here. But in summary, changes made by the government through the introduction of the 2015 care scheme were found to be discriminatory based on age. The remedy put in place is now bringing additional discrimination and leaving thousands of police officers in a position where they will have to work longer to receive less pension than they were promised when they joined. Our colleagues may have taken career breaks or work part-time, often to start a family, will be even more adversely affected. We've launched a judicial review against the government's pension remedy, and we've launched employment tribunals in support of some of our female colleagues on the basis of potential future sex discrimination. Let's be clear on this. We're taking legal action against the government for their unfair treatment of their police officers. A police service described as the best police service in the world. Is this the way our government should treat the people who deliver the world's best police service? These matters may be based on figures, but they're rooted in values, recognition, and well-being. The government cannot escape the powerful linkages that exist and are seen by everyone. Well-being is a word often used that encompasses so much. The well-being of our people is impacted by a huge range of job-related factors. From the physical nature of being attacked at work, something I'm saddened to say has increased yet again, to the mental toll of managing threat, harm and risk, and the damaging impact of being constantly devalued. Many officers, we also know, are beginning to struggle financially. As an association responding to the continuing pressure and lack of value for our members and the resulting toll we are seeing on mental health and well-being, we've launched a peer support programme. As part of this, we're providing training to our members as peer supporters, enabling them to offer professional and personal support to their own colleagues. This is available to all association members from this month. Every member in need of support will have access to a trained peer with a continuous programme in place so that we can help prevent superintendents facing professional difficulties as a result of the demand they face. We've also started a project to understand how we can support our members who retire after years of service and face a starkly different normality. This can also take its toll on well-being, and our duty of care should not stop as soon as their service ends. In 2019, the Home Secretary formally launched the Police Covenant, something we are resolutely committed to influencing and supporting. I'm an active member of the Governance Board and wholeheartedly support its purported aims. On one hand, this is an historic moment, creating a long-lasting system of support for officers, both serving and retired, plus their families, and it's full of positive intentions. We really welcome these positive intentions and have been impressed and encouraged by the energy and determination to make a difference. But this must lead to something tangible that can be seen and felt by those who need it. The biggest issue sits within the huge contradiction appearing between the commitments to well-being and the reality of police treatment on pay and pensions by the same government. The Covenant's stated purpose is to provide comprehensive, meaningful and lasting support to those working in policing. It is incomprehensible that there can be a publicised national commitment to this while simultaneously preventing thousands of police officers from receiving fair pay decided by a fair process and that keeps a pace with the basic cost of living. Many of these officers have also now lost the pension rights that they signed up to. As a result of all these issues, we ask 4 things of our government. We ask the government to call upon HMIC FRS to review the management infrastructure in forces to enable effective service delivery moving forward. We ask the government to constitute an independent review of the pay process. We ask the government to keep its promises and act without discrimination on the pension crisis. And we ask the government to give our police service priority and protection to deliver its policy intent in the forthcoming spending review, to maintain the momentum of investment which is so necessary for the future. Finally, once again, I return to the issue of diversity, equality and inclusion in policing. There are no poignant statements, thought-provoking reflections or damning statistics left to shock the system into action. It's all been said, and yet we remain woefully behind our stated goals. As keen advocates for valuing difference, we were supportive and encouraged to hear of the NPCC's race plan of action in the weeks following the tragic murder of George Floyd. Yet it's taken over a year to appoint an independent chair of the scrutiny panel, assessing this work and to develop a plan of action. Similarly, workforce statistics show that officers from Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups make up just 7.6% of the current workforce. An increase on last year, yes, but an increase of just 0.3%. Where is the accountability? We are acutely aware that our rank lacks the diversity that we desire, so we can no longer wait for action. That's why we've launched Future Supers, an initiative designed to support colleagues from underrepresented groups at the inspecting ranks with their promotion and development journey into our association. I'm delighted to say that through work entirely led by the association, with the content support from the NPCC and the College of Policing, we are now supporting over 300 Black, Asian and minority ethnic inspectors, chief inspectors and police staff equivalents from across the country, who are being coached and mentored by more than 150 association members, each giving up their own time to help this key project. I am incredibly proud of the impact of this association, which builds on the success of the National Coaching and Mentoring Scheme, which we launched in 2017. And credit to our members who continue to do whatever they can to support officers and staff. COVID has shown that we can make tangible, incredible changes within our processes, and our service can deliver quickly. We need to be very careful that the police service does not allow itself to slip back into the slow time progress that hampers the incredible insight and innovation that we know sits right across our workforce. Policing, quite rightly, has been a prized, sought-after career, offering incredible opportunities for thousands of officers who dedicate their lives to it. We must ensure we do all we can to keep officers engaged and fulfilled within their careers and not be tempted to leave. This is something we can change if we see real reform. Why? Because police officers share a stubborn, resolute pride in what they do. Despite everything I've outlined today, I still see and hear a police service that is incredibly proud of the vital role they play in society. They continue to drive forward with policing partners to keep people safe from harm. Yet we operate in an increasingly complex world where the respect for the role does not exist with certain elements of society. It's now commonplace to hear police officers being continually verbally threatened, being physically attacked, and mocked relentlessly on social media. Despite this, we see them running towards violent offenders, diving into rivers to rescue people, running into burning buildings to save others, going above and beyond for the public. Quite simply, they make the world of difference. I would like to finish by sharing what an honour and a privilege it has been to serve as a national officer since 2016 and to lead our association during what has been one of the most testing periods in the history of our police service. In my first ever speech to conference in 2016, I talked through a vision of a superintendent in 2052, living in a world shaped by data, analytics and artificial intelligence. I think and I hope that the sense of pride and passion for public duty will remain at the heart of the police officer of 2052, and if I'm honest, I believe it will. So let's start to change the narrative. Let's pave the way for a service and a government that is more in harmony. Let's strengthen the resolve and drive of the blue team by recognising our people for who and what they are, and let's deliver the best possible service to the public, a public we are proud to serve. Thank you.
Heartfelt and sincere, Paul. Thank you very much for those words. Now, unfortunately, as many of you know, the Home Secretary was unable to join us today to address conference and indeed to respond to Paul's words. However, we are asking that if you have any questions for her, can you please put them on the app, because Paul and Dan and the other executive team are going to make sure that those questions get to her. So if you could have any questions, please write them down, put them on the app, and they will get to her. Now, instead, we have been provided with a short video message. So let's hear from the Right Honourable Priti Patel, MP, Home Secretary.
I'm delighted to join your conference this year, but I do want to apologise that it has to be by video link. With Parliament in session during your conference, I'm required to be in London for crucial votes on government business. Last year, I thanked you for the superb work you and all of policing have done throughout the COVID pandemic. Throughout the pandemic, as we know, changes to guidance and COVID restrictions created difficult situations, and you did not flinch. Thank you for continuing to do your exceptionally challenging jobs in these exceptionally difficult times. This is also a moment to pay tribute to all of those officers who have fallen in the line of duty. In July, I, like many of you, visited the National Memorial Arboretum, which was intensely moving and poignant. It was a reminder to us all and to the public of the ultimate sacrifice that has been made by so many colleagues during their policing career as they sought to keep the public safe. I want to address the question of police pay. The Chancellor of the Exchequer was very clear at the last spending review that the significant economic impact of COVID-19 forced the government to take very difficult decisions. The pandemic deepened the disparity between public and private sector wages. Many private sector workers lost their jobs, were furloughed, or saw their hours and wages seriously reduced. This meant the Chancellor could not justify an across-the-board pay increase for public sector workers. He asked for the advice of the pay reviews body, proposing to raise pay in the NHS but pause pay rises elsewhere in order to protect jobs. However, workers below the median wage, including police officers, did receive a rise. Fire and Rescue Service pay is negotiated through the Independent Joint National Council. The government has no statutory role in determining the pay of firefighters. Central government likewise has no role in local authority staff pay. This pandemic is something we have never experienced before. A truly seismic event which has affected many sectors and employers across the entire economy. It has meant even tougher choices than usual, and none of us wanted to be in this situation. This is obviously a matter for the PSA, but I would urge you to ensure that your members' voices are heard by the pay review body for the next round. Likewise on pensions, we seek a workable solution that is fair to the public sector and fair to taxpayers. I know that the PSA attended an engagement session with the Treasury on the recently introduced pensions bill this month, as well as one with the Home Office in August. We want to work with you as government finds a way through. On diversity in policing, we are supporting police forces with a variety of recruitment strategies, whilst delivering a national campaign designed to reach diverse audiences. In every discussion on this important issue, I have always stated that diversity is not just an issue when it comes to recruitment. Paul and the National Policing Board know that I have set the bar high on the issue of retention and career progression, key areas of people investment that have been overlooked for too long. This year, the College of Policing will plan and design a new fast-track inspector superintendent programme. This is really welcome, as is the PSA's Future Supers coaching and mentoring programme with the college, and I'm delighted that over 300 ethnic minority inspectors, chief inspectors and police staff equivalents have signed up. On our joint fundamental task of driving down crime, we have made progress, but there is more to do. Of course, COVID restrictions had an effect of suppressing many crimes, but the latest crime statistics for the year to March 2021 show that overall crime levels were stable. Serious violence fell by 14%, homicide fell by 16%. Meanwhile, neighbourhood crime had fallen by 31% over the last 2 years. In July, we published our Beating Crime Plan. Operational decisions are for you, but the Prime Minister and I have set out our strategic approach for cutting crime as a complement to the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, which has its second reading in the House of Lords today. It is essential that we cut crime. Crime blights communities and destroys lives. Our Beating Crime Plan has 3 overarching priorities: traditional crime, such as serious violence, homicide and neighbourhood crime; hidden harms and fraud and online. We have introduced measures to strengthen the links between communities and policing through the recruitment of an additional 20,000 police officers by March 2023. We have made £130 million available this year to tackle serious violence, including murder and knife crime. This includes £30 million for the 18 crime areas across England and Wales worst affected by serious violence, supporting the police in identifying violent hotspots and targeting operational activity in those areas. £35 million in the same 18 areas to develop violence reduction units, and £20 million for new early intervention programmes to help stop young people from being drawn into violence. Drugs are not only a scourge in their own right, but a major driver of crime. That's why the government has invested £59 million in Project Adder up to March 2023. This project lets us work with forces to test a systematic approach to tackling drugs that balances enforcement with diversion, treatment and recovery. We have also invested heavily in tackling the drug supply and tackling county line gangs. Since launching in November 2019, the County Lines programme has resulted in the closure of more than 1,100 lines, over 6,300 arrests and over £2.9 million in cash and significant quantities of drugs seized, and more than 1,900 vulnerable people safeguarded. The Beating Crime Plan outlines our strategies for such other crimes, as those that involve hidden harms. Crimes like domestic abuse, rape, modern slavery and child sexual abuse are not always as visible as others, but they have a devastating impact. We are building capacity around fraud, cybercrime and other forms of online harm that blight people's lives. The Beating Crime Plan also sets out our firm commitment to tackle economic crime particularly fraud and cybercrime. We are publishing a fraud action plan, further hardening the UK's defences against fraudsters and replacing action fraud with an improved national fraud and cybercrime reporting system. Our network of regional organised crime units includes cybercrime and dark web units. They are now up and running and provide access to specialist capabilities. At a local level, we have established specialist cybercrime units in every local police force in England and Wales. We are also providing policing with the cyber skills and training needed through the Cyber Digital Career Pathway, delivered at the College of Policing. We will continue to support and develop capacity in the law enforcement cybercrime network. I want us to evolve it from reactive to being proactive. And we are developing a campaign to confront the growing threat of ransomware and disrupt cyber criminals based overseas. Meanwhile, antisocial behaviour and crime exist on a continuum and first often leads to the latter. There are a range of flexible tools and powers available to the police and to other local agencies to tackle antisocial behaviour, and we are working with local areas to ensure that they are being used effectively. We are going to work even harder with police officers and with police and crime commissioners to address antisocial behaviour, often employing local solutions. We are acutely aware of the dangers of adding to your burden, but all public organisations need to be fully accountable to the public. Elected politicians, and I know this is overwhelmingly true of police officers too, frequently hear concerns from the public about response times. That is why the Beating Crime Plan includes a commitment to develop league tables for response times to 101 and 999 calls. I want to work very closely with you and will support you on the implementation of the Beating Crime Plan in operational settings. A critical element to beating crime is ensuring the police have all the powers they need to do their jobs. Senior officers agree that stop and search is crucial. We piloted relaxation to voluntary conditions on Section 60 stop and search, empowering 9,000 more officers to authorise its use. We gathered the views of police officers and community scrutiny leaders throughout this process, and we found that police officers felt more confident using Section 60 and that these relaxations better reflected the operational reality of policing. Consequently, the Beating Crime Plan made the relaxations permanent. A month ago, we saw the tragic and terrible shootings in Plymouth. Once again, we have been devastated by senseless, appalling crime, and families have been left heartbroken. My visit to Plymouth was shattering, but it was hugely reassuring to talk to police officers who were there. They were doing an extremely professional job in deeply distressing circumstances. Events like this are rare, but that is no consolation to those affected, and their impact is felt throughout the country. I have asked police forces in England, Scotland and Wales urgently to review firearms licensing practices. In particular, I have asked for a full review of all certificates that have been seized, refused, revoked or surrendered in the past 12 months and then subsequently approved by the police. The Home Office is bringing forward new statutory guidance to improve how people applying for firearms licences are assessed in future, with greater consistency and improved standards. Nobody will be given a firearms licence unless their doctor has confirmed to the police that they don't have any medical conditions, including in relation to their mental health. The new guidance will also make explicit that firearms applicants may be subject to social media checks. The Independent Office for Police Conduct is also looking at the issues around the granting of firearms licences to those involved. As all this is work which is ongoing, I won't comment further, but clearly it is vital that we do all we reasonably can to prevent further tragedies like we saw in Plymouth. The public need to know that all necessary checks have been made to help to keep them safe. It is also important that we never lose sight of the human side of policing. It's right to set priorities and frame strategies and to use technology and data in a skillful way. Ultimately, though, policing is delivered by people. It matters that the police force is representative. It's also why we need to think so hard about welfare. Police officers have faced all the same pressures as the rest of us throughout the pandemic, on top of having an even harder job than normal. Policing is difficult and ferociously demanding, and leadership roles like yours bring additional pressures. The Police Covenant was long overdue, and I am very grateful to the Police Superintendents Association for all you have done to champion and support the development of the Covenant. The Covenant will include a focus on occupational health standards and mental health training. We're also looking at options with the Police Wellbeing Service for appointing a new Chief Medical Officer for policing in England and Wales. The Frontline review clearly revealed your frustrations about unnecessary demands getting in the way of core policing, including internally generated demands such as disproportionate administration, overtly bureaucratic processes, ineffective IT, and difficulties in sharing best practice and learning. The development of the Police Covenant will draw on evidence from the Frontline review. Addressing organisational issues is a major priority. This has been a privilege to join your conference today. I value my interactions with policing, and my support for your work and policing is resolute. Each of you across the Police Superintendents Association has a central role to play as we pursue our shared mission to keep this country safe. Thank you for all you do.
I know you've all been hugely disappointed that she's not here to answer some of the many questions that we've got. I've got all the feedback from members, etc. She's got parliamentary commitments, and we respect that as an essential part of our liberal democracy. But I made the decision to contact the Shadow Home Secretary to see whether he could avail himself to come to this particular event and speak. And I'm absolutely delighted that Nick Thomas Simmons, Shadow Home Secretary, is here to address you today. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to be here with you all today. And it is a great honour to be here to speak at this conference. And I know how important moments like this are for the Police Superintendents Association, particularly with it being your first physical conference since the pandemic. And I want to say a special thank you to Paul Griffiths and to Dan Murphy, your National Secretary, for their leadership, for the positive, constructive relationship they've developed with me and my Shadow Policing Minister, Sarah Jones, over the past 17 months. And they have continuously made sure that the voice of police superintendents is heard at Westminster with our monthly meetings, and made sure that I, as the Shadow Home Secretary, am always familiar with the issues that are affecting you all. And I know that this organisation and all of your members play an absolutely critical role in keeping our communities safe and helping to deliver the best possible deal for officers. You are leaders in the world of policing, and your time is precious. So the significance of this opportunity to speak today is not lost on me, and I look forward to setting out my thoughts and having a discussion and taking questions afterwards. And I'd like to start by saying thank you to all of you for the incredible work that your members and the teams that they oversee do to keep us safe. And when I was putting this speech together, I was stopped in my tracks by a recent report from the association. When Paul unveiled a memorial to Jerry Richardson, a superintendent killed half a century ago this year, shot on duty when apprehending an armed robber, and posthumously awarded the George Cross for bravery. It's an incredibly powerful and moving story, not only because of the service that Jerry Richardson gave to our country, making the ultimate sacrifice to keep his community safe, but it also acts as a powerful reminder that throughout our history, our police officers have shown remarkable commitment to this remarkable job, displaying a level of bravery that is frankly a true inspiration. It has always been that way, and our police officers continue to show that dedication day in and day out. It's why the National Police Memorial, the dedication of which I was proud to attend alongside Paul, is so moving. It's a partially open door, a permanent symbol of the risks officers face every day, on every shift, not knowing what awaits them on the other side. And I've always had the greatest of admiration for those who make sacrifices to help others. If you ever came to my constituency office in Pontypool, you would see on the wall my great-grandfather's medals that he won both before and during the First World War, making that sacrifice for his country. My inspiration to come into politics was my grandmother, who wanted to be a nurse and achieved that ambition at the age of 56. But I know that service of others is fraught with risk. And we have seen it again, all too appallingly in recent years. Just in the last 2 years, we've seen the heartbreaking deaths of Matt Gratana and Andrew Harper. Both remarkable men, true, brave public servants, senselessly taken from their families, their friends, and their colleagues. I have met with Andrew's wife, Lissy, and it is impossible not to be moved by all that she has endured. And it is absolutely clear that more has to be done to punish those who target our emergency service workers. And that is something that I and my party will keep pushing on. And I have made clear time and time again that this abuse is wholly unacceptable. Of course, as we think of the past 17 months, it's not only through those ultimate sacrifices that officers have showed their extraordinary commitment and bravery. And the most powerful example of this was the remarkable way that police, officers and staff continued to play such a vital role in our communities throughout the pandemic. Even at the very outset, when testing and PPE was in very short supply, when frankly we didn't have the knowledge we have now about the risks of the virus, we saw our police service turn up day in, day out, putting their health at risk to keep us safe. And speaking to officers and leaders in policing, like Paul, at that time, left an indelible mark on me. And I will always remember the service you gave, the leadership that you showed in the most challenging of times, once again heading towards danger when so many others could look the other way. And when the country called, you answered, and we as a country, in response, must remember that. And that's why it is so vital that you have a strong and effective association. And I'm proud that since I've been in the job of Shadow Home Secretary, I've seen what a powerful, articulate and passionate voice Paul is for his members. And as the history of the Police Superintendents Association shows, you have a vital place in British policing. I work regularly too with John Apter and other members of the Police Federation. I know how closely you all work together. However, while many challenges are shared between the Federation and you, and I will come on to the issue of the disgraceful pay offer in a moment, there are also many unique challenges that face superintendents and chief superintendents in the police forces that you all represent. And to be frank, many of your members have some of the most stressful jobs imaginable. Not just in policing, but frankly, anywhere. I will always talk, about the extraordinary bravery of officers on the front line. And I know many of your members still face those risks too. But there is also a huge responsibility that rests on the shoulders of senior officers. In areas like being the senior decision maker during huge operational incidents, running units undertaking dangerous work on areas like violent crime and safeguarding, or deciding where to focus limited resources, knowing the impact your decision makes on people's lives every day. This is major decision making on a daily basis that has far-reaching consequences. And I have a great deal of respect for that work you lead. That inevitable pressure also shows why it is vital that you have good representation to lean on and the support of colleagues who are going through similar challenges. And I know this association plays that role for many of its members. And I will make no apology for banging the drum for policing in my job. I know the pressures that have been put on senior officers. Years of being asked to do more and more in a world of increasingly complex crime with fewer and fewer resources. And at times, it must have felt like the pressure was unrelenting. And it is completely unsustainable to have cut 21,000 officers from the police whilst driving down staff and PCO numbers and continuing to have a real term pay deduction in your budgets. But the government was still asking and expecting the same results. And it causes further issues down the line. I heard recently, during a meeting with police in Wolverhampton, one of the youngest forces there in the country, that there are real challenges trying to integrate new young officers into the jobs without the increase in police staff to help. And I realise that this is a major issue for senior leaders like you. And it angers me, frankly, because things should not have got to this point. If you would forgive me just for a moment for saying that I am proud that the last Labour government drove up police officer numbers, police staff numbers, and PCSOs. And I assure you today that we have a continued commitment to community policing because we know the damage that crime does. It can strike anyone and be devastating, but time and again, it's our poorest communities that are hardest hit. And we also realise, and I hear this so often from the police officers that I meet, that when it comes to some of the worst crimes, especially those involving safeguarding, youth violence, or drugs, you can't only arrest your way out of the problem, however outstanding, and they are outstanding, believe me, our frontline officers are. And that's why it troubles me that I see police officers time and time again becoming the fallback service when all others have failed. As it was put to me yesterday when I was at the Police Federation HQ in Leatherhead, you are the service that never says no. And nowhere is that more evident than in the huge gap in services we are seeing for mental health and addiction. Now, when I'm out with officers, and I've been privileged to join a number of officers on shift over the past 17 months, they don't begrudge for a moment helping those in desperate need. But it isn't the best use of their time, and there should be specialists trained for that kind of work. I know too, this must be a huge headache for senior officers when looking to plan resources. All too often, the heavy load of failing systems is falling on the police. It's not right, it's not fair, and we can't go on like this. We need to understand these pressures and act on them. And that has to involve too, investing in preventative services that have been decimated. It isn't only about reacting to crime. Let's also prevent it in the first place. And of course, one of the areas where we have seen the impact of cuts to investment on the people you lead most starkly is in the shameful decision by this government to insist on a pay freeze for officers. And let's actually call it what it is. It's a real terms pay cut for the police. I know how insulted many of you here will have been by that decision, and rightly so. I am proud that as a country, we came together to clap for those serving so bravely during the lockdowns and during the pandemic. It was an important, but perhaps sadly rare moment when we recognise the value of who the real heroes and heroines in our society are. But it beggars belief that members of this government were happy to clap for heroes, but when it came to delivering a fair pay settlement, they turned their backs. In my view, it was especially shameful that ministers effectively rode roughshod over the work of the Police Remuneration Review Body. It is totally unacceptable to, firstly, not even instruct that body about a pay rise, to ignore its views, to tie its hands. And I'm sure this was not only a disappointment to each and every superintendent and chief superintendent personally, but also made your jobs even harder. Lifting the morale of officers and staff after news like that must have been an enormous challenge, which very unfairly falls to your members. And I know the association has taken the decision to withdraw itself from the Police Remuneration Review Body. I know that is not an easy decision, but is a necessary one when the balance of power is so unfair and the process is in such desperate need of reform. Now, I know this session has time for questions, and as part of that, I want to hear from you, as leaders in the world of policing, about the challenges you face today, as well as the opportunities and the difficulties the future presents. But first, let me just share with you what Labour would prioritise, working alongside all of you. We will deliver a plan to help to tackle the appalling violence that women and girls continue to face in this country, whilst driving up conviction rates for rape and sexual assault. Develop new protections and support for victims of crime to help people when they need it most. A victims law that ensures the specialist help that's needed is there. Tougher penalties for those who attack emergency service workers. And let me say too about our commitment to a full, properly independent police covenant that does what it is supposed to and protects police and policing families up and down the country. Working to put extra investment into tackling antisocial behaviour that can blight our communities. And making sure that we have police in our communities, fundamental for instilling public confidence. Now, many senior officers I have met have told me about their passion and commitment to driving up diversity in recruitment across policing. I was delighted Paul again mentioned his personal commitment to that in his speech a moment or two ago. It's a passion I share, and I want to see how we can help your efforts in this vital work. Now, I want people to feel safe on our streets, not to be fearful of serious violent crime that is sadly on the rise. Crime can be tackled, it can be driven down, not by officers burdened with filling out paperwork, but on the streets, in neighbourhoods, building that vital trust where, frankly, it should be the criminals who are in fear once again. I know you all came into this role to make society a better place. That is the principle we must all start from, to build a future where young people aspire to do well and not end up living a life of crime or in a gang. That we have sufficient support services so that people can be treated and looked after. That aspiration can be a reality. That is what my passion is. That's the reality that I want to create as Home Secretary. Safer streets, tackling crime, taking away incentives for criminals, and knowing our young people can grow up in the safest country in the world. As Home Secretary, my priority, Labour's priority, would be to keep you, your family, and your community safe. But all of these aspirations will only remain that unless you, our officers, have the full backing, respect, and confidence of the government of the day. With my party, you can be sure you do, and you will. So I look forward to speaking to you all, to listening to your ideas about what works well in policing that we can build on, and what are the areas that we need to change quickly. You are the experts, you are the leaders in your field. I'm deeply grateful for your time today. I look forward to that discussion, and thank you very much for having the chance to address you this afternoon. So come here.
Thank you very much. And we do have lots of questions that are coming in. Can we clarify the first question, really, which I think, if you don't mind, we're going to put to you, Nick, if that's all right.
Yes.
And it is quite simply that for the shadow, well, certainly for you, sorry, is there a mechanism which allows the pairing of cabinet and shadow cabinet ministers for parliamentary business? And if so, how can you be here and not the Home Secretary?
Well, the answer to your first question is that there is absolutely a pairing mechanism, and I can't comment on what the Home Secretary's particular commitments are, but certainly in terms of my position, I would, in any event, have been here first thing in the morning to address you, would have been attending the dinner. I went to my whip some weeks ago and said that this is a top priority for me to be here. You must ensure that I have the time to attend the conference. That is absolutely what they did, and my priority is absolutely to be here with you today.
Okay. So what you're saying, in effect, is you both could have been here.
Put it this way, I see no reason why we couldn't have seen the Home Secretary in person. Given that I am here, I think our votes might have cancelled each other out today.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to carry on with the questions then. Now, again, for you, Nick, the words that you speak, very promising, but will you stand up in Parliament and repeat those words about pay, and in particular the ongoing pension issues which greatly affect morale, and perhaps could go some way to reflect the daily dangers that the officers face?
Yes, I have, and I will. And let me just be clear to all of you about this issue of pay, because I think it's so important. I heard what the Home Secretary said on the video then. But there are other public sector workers who are having a pay rise. Now, I'm not begrudging them a penny of it. They are people who are out on the front line. But why on earth has policing been singled out in this way? And it's particularly awful, in my view, because of the whole structure of your pay. You know, after the First World War, the way it was set up was that the police would have a federation You wouldn't have unions like you have, for example, in the NHS, where, of course, you have Unison and other trade unions. You wouldn't have that. And there was this covenant, and we'll use that word covenant, between governments of the day and policing. The governments would recognise that in the way that they made policing awards. And I think this government has comprehensively failed to do that. Now, had I been the Home Secretary, I wouldn't have been writing a letter last December tying the hands of the remuneration body. I would have been asking for their independent assessment of the rise and then awarding it. Now, that doesn't mean, though, that I think this process as it stands isn't in need of reform. It is desperately in need of reform because of a huge power imbalance where the Home Secretary of the day can simply ignore what its findings are. My view is that is completely wrong. It is in need of reform, and yes, I will say it time and time again in Parliament. On the issue of pensions, and I'm very grateful actually to Dan for all his thorough briefings on this, but clearly the government has been ignoring suggestions. You've got that 1987 scheme, the 2006 scheme, both of them coming to an end next April, when actually the government could have chosen different dates. There's nothing that says the government had to do that. I know that there will be both of the legal challenges that are going on, the judicial review and indeed the employment tribunal. I wish you all well with those challenges. I think what's happened is fundamentally unfair, and I will be doing all I can through the parliamentary process to urge the government to think again and correct this injustice.
Okay. Paul, I know you chose your words carefully, but do you think the Home Secretary answered your questions?
Well, when you think of the response and the fact that we'd shared the speech beforehand, there were 4 key areas to look at: superintendent numbers, pay, pensions, and the forthcoming spending review. And I didn't hear much of a response during that video recorded piece. So this is why I'm disappointed for our members that she's not here now with both of us to actually answer and respond to these issues, because I'm sure they would have been raised by members expecting a response.
Okay. Do you actually think she would have answered them in person? Or do you think we would have had a similar response?
Well, I mean, at least we had more of a chance to have a discussion and try and draw out some of the issues and see whether there's opportunity for compromise or negotiation.
Okay, fair enough. Right. Shadow Home Secretary, can we ask what is your view on police performance league tables?
I'm deeply sceptical of police performance league tables. I'm not sure that they are an effective way of producing the results that we all want to see. I saw what the Home Secretary said, then I looked very carefully at what she says, but I have grave doubts about the use of league tables.
Okay, Paul, do you want to?
Ironically, it was this very association, through the leadership of Irene Curtis, that had to look at target setting and performance tables. And that was an instruction on the Home Secretary at the time, Theresa May. She produced a very detailed and quite damning report about the risks that are involved in this type of practice, which was accepted by the government and administration at the time. So I've got great fears about this introduction, and I've seen it starting to come through on the beating crime plan. And I think we've got to be very resolute as a service here and push back on this, because there are significant risks about the adverse effect on police behaviour.
Okay. I'm going to rattle through these because we're getting lots coming in. Sir Tom Windsor has highlighted the restrictive impact of annual funding settlements on the efficiency and effectiveness on the police service. Will you commit to 5-year funding arrangements to allow us to deliver our business in a more sustainable way?
I certainly will commit to it being more sustainable. I'll get in trouble with our Shadow Chancellor if I just decree 5 years from up on the platform. But certainly, look, this isn't only an issue in policing. When I've spoken to a number of different sectors, the annual way of doing it creates deep uncertainty, and I think we certainly have to look. When you cover a comprehensive spending review, when you look at the budgets, that you do it on a year-by-year basis. I think that is a far better way to enable people to strategically plan ahead.
But it does need sustained funding.
It does. I totally agree.
That's the key.
I totally agree.
Okay. Paul, we've got a question here for you. What was your initial reaction to seeing the Home Secretary speak, especially when she didn't answer your concerns?
We've had quite an engaging relationship with her. She's been to see both her national committee, been to her head office, and there has been quite regular contact with her. But over time, we've started to see more and more tensions around our numbers, around some of the pay issues and the pension issues, causing us to take litigation, which is where none of us want to be. And what we're very, very keen to do is to get back around the table and try and sort some of these problems out, because they affect a number of police officers, thousands. And all we want is to try and bring this home in a sort of carefully crafted way so that there is no discrimination, no issues, and there is absolute fairness about our pay.
So what is going to happen next then?
Well, we have a meeting with the Home Secretary in the diary next week. We will take your questions with us. It's a face-to-face meeting, and we look forward to seeing her and explaining some of the issues that have come up, some of the decisions that have been made, and seeing what is next from the government's perspective.
Okay, thank you. Shadow Home Secretary, will you be supporting the concept of a medal along the lines of the World War II Defence Medal to recognise the work and dangers faced by the police and other frontline workers during the pandemic? Everybody has said how wonderful the police service has been, and it is recognised by Joe Public, by all of us. So is there going to be some sort of acknowledgement?
I certainly would support that, and I do think that is important, but it isn't a substitute for you being paid fairly for what you do. Let's be frank about that. And I think that it has, if we are saying, and I think this applies so much to what you've all done throughout the pandemic, because absolutely all our frontline workers face risks. But I know that during the pandemic, police officers couldn't control the risk of their exposure to COVID. Now, I visited many police stations. Of course, I saw the masks, I saw the hand sanitizer, I saw the risk assessments and so on. But when officers were out on shift, you didn't know who you were going to come into contact with, and you didn't know what their COVID status was. And I think that has to be recognised in your pay. And whilst I would, of course, support a medal, do I think that's sufficient recognition? No.
Okay, fair enough. I know we've got some questions from the press for you as well. And I believe there is there a gentleman who's waiting to take a question? Yeah, there, please.
Hi, Paul. Today you've announced that the PSA will withdraw from the police remuneration review body following the Federation. After the Federation made that announcement, they expressed a resolution of no confidence in the Home Secretary. Does she have your confidence?
As an association and leading the association, we've not gone down a road of no confidence. We want to continue to engage. We want problem solving. We think there are deep structural issues that we need an element of fairness around our pay. We need to iron out the issues of discrimination around pensions. So this is more about us getting into structural problem solving than dealing with individual issues.
Okay. Any more questions from the floor at this point? Yeah, we do have one in the corner.
Hello, Simon Ovens from the Met. Shadow Home Secretary. Sorry, that was a Freudian slip. Shadow Home Secretary. I just want to ask you about your view and the party's view about police and crime commissioners. In the many years that I've been in the police service, I have never known a period of more politicisation in terms of decision-makings around budgets and indeed operational matters and commenting on appointment of senior officers, etc. Even, I dare say, recent stuff about our own commissioner and public order. What would be the Labour Party's view on them should you take action? And frankly, would you be willing to replace them with some other mechanism?
No, I think police and crime commissioners are here to stay, but I do take what you say about politicisation. I think there's a particular issue, frankly, with social media. And time again, you see these partial videos that apply on social media, to which people apply an instant judgment rather than a more considered judgment. And I think we really do need to be extraordinarily careful about this. I know the impact it has on the morale of our police. I know the impact it has when a video, which probably is a tiny proportion of what actually happened, suddenly goes viral. And I think we as politicians need to be extremely considered in that approach and very mindful of what appears to be this instant, highly charged, highly political debate that often happens on social media that, frankly, is based on, at best, partial facts.
Okay, thank you for that. We've got another couple of questions, which something you touched on. You spoke about the police stepping in to respond to incidents on behalf of other agencies who are more appropriate, for example, mental health or ambulance. So how would you resource them to manage their own demand and hold them to account if they don't?
Well, I think the issue here actually lies with the lack of resourcing in some of the other services. And as I said in my remarks earlier, I was struck yesterday when I was having a discussion at the Police Federation in Leatherhead, when I was told, you are the service that never says no, and I think that is entirely right. It is, of course, greatly to your credit that you do that. But the withdrawal of other services, particularly on things like drug addiction, particularly on things like mental health, mean that you have officer time taken up in a way that it shouldn't be. And the way that we deal with that is through investment and prioritisation in the other services to ensure actually that people are getting the specialist support that they need and police officer time is most effectively used.
Okay. Do you think the police covenant does what it's supposed to do and what it needs to do for police officers?
My concern about the police covenant is I don't believe at the moment it is sufficiently independent. I think it needs to be completely independent. I see it like and want it to be like the military covenant and to have that status in our society. And the proof with it, frankly, will be in the pudding. I want to see it not just as that with that independence that can robustly hold the government to account of whatever colour the government of the day happens to be, but it also needs to make that difference day to day to you and your families to feel you actually have that protection in place. We can't have something, significant though it is, and I'm a passionate supporter of a policing covenant, but it has to be effective and it has to make a difference.
Okay. A lot of this comes down to funding, doesn't it?
It does.
A lot of what we've been talking about. And that is the one thing the government would say, that this year has been completely different from any other following the pandemic. As I keep saying, it wasn't in their manifesto. I mean, what would your response be had you been in power? I wonder, would it have been hugely different?
Look, politics is about choices. Politics is about priorities. It's about where you wish to spend money. I've made clear, for example, that I wouldn't be spending £283 million on a yacht. I would be spending that £283 million on policing and our communities and tackling antisocial behaviour. Politics is always about choices. I have a very different set of priorities. Keir Starmer has a very different set of priorities, drawing, of course, on his work as Director of Public Prosecutions. We'll be making very different decisions.
Okay. There's been lots of people commenting saying, Shadow Home Secretary, they want to thank you for coming today and for answering those questions. And Paul, I have to give you this one. It says, I think someone knows what this is, but John Apter has said, I had a meeting with the Home Secretary scheduled for Thursday. It's just been cancelled. Don't book your train tickets for next week.
Well, if John's free, should we meet? Yeah, okay. Thank you.
I know we've just got one hand up, so I'm going to let that person have the question.
Hi, question for Nick. Nick, you just talked about jumping to judgments on social media and how it can affect morale, I believe. You jumped to judgment after the Clapham Common Vigil. where you were amongst other politicians who questioned police actions which were found to be appropriate. So I just wanted to see if you'd apologise to policing.
I will always, what I will promise each and every person in this room is you will always get from me something that is considered. That is the only time in the whole of the 17 months I've been in this job I expressed some concern. And if I am concerned, I will express that concern. But Sir Thomas Windsor, you're absolutely right, completely vindicated the policing, and I completely accept what Thomas Windsor said. But let me just say that the promise I make to you all, I won't say that at times I won't express particular views, but I will always be considered and I will always give justification for what I do.
Okay, we are going to leave it there because we are out of time. Shadow Home Secretary Nick Thomas Simmons, thank you very much. And of course, PSA Secretary Paul Griffiths, thank you both. Let's give them both a round of applause, please.